Well, welcome everyone, especially the people who've been here all afternoon. Kick back, relax. This is the last session. I am so excited to join with a couple of panelists who I will introduce in a second, but this is Creativity and Identity, What's Your Story? Essentially, all this session we are going to talk about the importance of story. I'm a filmmaker, an author, a nerd whisperer, which means I work with science organizations talking about storytelling. I think story is everything. And what we mean about story, it's the traditional kind of storytelling. It's not just once upon a time or a bedtime story. I think story is the way we communicate. It's the way we talk about our identity, who we are, what's important to us, and what we do. So I would like to welcome you to our panelists. We have Catherine joining us from Glasgow here in person. Welcome, Catherine. We have Bridget McNulty somewhere. Hello. Hi, you two. We have Bridget McNulty joining us from South Africa. Hi, Bridget. And we have Willeke joining us from Southwest Scotland via the Netherlands. Hi, Willeke. And I'm going to let our panelists, since today is about storytelling and identity, I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. So because you guys have been patient and online, Bridget, can we begin with you? Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Bridget McNulty. I am from Cape Town, South Africa, as Jess said. So we are at the beginning of a very cold autumn, heading into winter, and I'm jealous of your sunshine that's out of the world. I am the co-founder of Sweet Life Diabetes Community, which is South Africa's largest online diabetes community. And we started Sweet Life 11 years ago when I was, after I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I was sent home with this whole stack of information. I knew nothing about diabetes, and everything I read said I was now at greater risk of blindness, amputation, heart disease, kidney failure. And nowhere in anything I read did it say, or you can live a perfectly happy, healthy life with diabetes. Mm-hmm. So that's what we do at Sweet Life. We empower people living with diabetes in South Africa to be able to live happy, healthy lives. And we do that predominantly through education, but also through advocacy. I am also an author. I published a novel when I was 25. And a couple of years ago, I published the Grief Handbook, a guide through the worst days of your life, after my mom died very suddenly. So it has been suggested that I take the worst things that happen to me in life and creatively turn them into things, which I think is true, but I would like to pause now and have no more bad things happen if that is an option. Thank you for having me here today.
Bridget, thank you so much. And Bridget may seem familiar to some of you who have been lucky enough to watch or take her branding workshop that she did with us. It is really worth watching, and I think we have it on play again via Expo North. Willeke, hello. It's so nice to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Willeke Marijn. I'm the CEO of the Resource Alliance. And the Resource Alliance is a global community of fundraisers, change makers working in the social impact sector from across the globe. And what we try to do is share with each other best practices, learnings, sometimes also failures, to avoid them for the future, to create accelerated impact, and to see how we can work together in a collaborative way to reach purposes that we are there for. So that could be related to community work, it could be related to creating better impact and stopping inequality around environmental issues, etc. But it's mainly the idea of sharing amongst each other the best practices to create that accelerated impact. No author, never written a book. Love to, maybe one day. I do not know if that's really my big creative assets that I have. Love reading a book, so definitely on the other side. But very nice to be here.
We're so lucky to have you, and so nice for you to join us. I can imagine with all those different cultures and purposes that you work with, storytelling is very important. So I cannot wait to dive in there. Catherine, thank you for being so patient. Welcome to your panel, your virtual panel too. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, my name is Catherine Devaney. I'm an author and a journalist, and I work for the National Union of Journalists, organising training courses for media professionals in the Highlands and Islands. But in the best tradition of storytelling, probably the easiest way for me to talk about the way I use storytelling is to tell you how I came to use storytelling in my work. And it really came about through writing fiction. When I was a journalist, I was spending most of my time interviewing celebrities for a Sunday magazine. But then life intervened, and something happened that made me change all my thinking about what I was writing. I always thought that if I wrote a book, it would be a biography, because that's what I did in my day job. I talked to people about their lives, and I thought that's the way I would go. I didn't think I had fiction in me. I didn't think that I was a storyteller in that way. And then my father died, and that was a huge, huge thing in my life. And the point about narrative is that narrative creates a context for people, and it's also a bridge. So in telling you my story here about how I came to use storytelling, it's likely that there are things that you will identify with. We all know what bereavement is like. And as creative people, we often turn to creative things in order to cope with grief and bereavement. And that's what I did. And I suddenly realised that perhaps I had fiction in me after all. My story wasn't autobiographical, but I used my experience of grief to write my first novel. And something happened during the writing of that novel. At the end of it, I realised that I had processed an emotion. It wasn't that I was suddenly over the death of my father. You learn to absorb grief rather than get over it. It's not a hurdle to jump in that sense. But I realised that I had processed it, that I had come to terms with something, and I realised that that was really a very interesting thing that had happened, but my primary aim was to write a novel. And I tucked away the thought that perhaps this could be used in a therapeutic context at some point. And later, it was many years before I went back to university to do a PhD looking at the psychology of writing and looking at those connections between the people that I'd interviewed, the lives that they told me about, my own life, the way that I had used pieces of fact in a fictional context. And I realised just how therapeutic that could be. I had a very interesting conversation with a psychologist, my partner who's here today, is sitting at the back, who worked with me to create a course called Creative Writing for Wellbeing. And within that course, I teach the usual traditional aspects of creative writing, but I also use it to encourage people to process difficult emotions, including really quite severe traumas. Patrick and I did a conventional academic study, and the results were really better even than we had dared to hope. Wow. But even within the kind of day-to-day running of this course, the way that people processed emotion was really quite remarkable. We had people who had been raped, people who had lost members of their family in murders, people who had lost members of their family in terrorist attacks more than 20 years ago, who came at the end of the course saying, I can't believe what has happened in the process of writing. And perhaps as the session goes on, we can look at why that actually works and what that process is all about.
Catherine, thank you. We definitely will. I want to pretend, like any good storytelling atmosphere, there's a campfire here. We are going to get you to ask some questions with us, but especially with the panelists, I know there's a lot of crossover. Bridget wrote a grief handbook. Wilka's dealing with multiple different people, both internally in her organization and externally. So I want you guys to be able to ask each other questions during, so please jump in. But the first question I want to pose to our panel, Bridget, I think we're going to begin with you again, is what is story to you, and can you tell us a little bit of an example, maybe a current example about how you're using it right now in your work?
You know, it's so interesting because I knew you were going to ask this question, so I've been thinking about it this week. And my first impulse was that I almost couldn't see where story is because it's so embedded in everything that we do. So I had to look quite hard because it's such a natural part of the work that we do. So we have kind of two different audiences. The one is our community of people living with diabetes, and then the other is healthcare providers and the media. So people who are trying to create more awareness about diabetes with. So internally with our community, we're speaking a lot about diabetes education, right? Which is a dry topic. It's the the essentials that we've come down to, we have a mnemonic, which is TEAL, TEEL, and that stands for take your medication, eat healthy food, exercise a little each day, and lose weight if you need to. This is stuff that we all know. Like this is what we should all be doing to live a healthy life. Hopefully, you don't need to take medication. So our challenge is to create ways of sharing this information that is both easily accessible and that people can absorb. And as humans, I think we can't absorb many facts if they are just force-fed to us, because they're dry and boring and we don't want to absorb them. And so we have to find creative ways of telling stories about these essential atoms in a way that people will absorb them into their lives and then actually incorporate the behavior change. And I think the behavior change part of storytelling is what's so fascinating. And that's what you were just saying, Matt, is that through story, we can change as people in some ways. Yeah. And so that's what we're mainly trying to do with our community. It is slightly more complicated in that we have 11 official languages in South Africa.
Wow.
And so while English is widely spoken, it's not the first language of most people. So we can't use very sophisticated language. We have to use really simple and easy to understand language. And we're experimenting with various things. So we're about to build our first WhatsApp chatbot. We do a lot of interactive leaflets, not just plain paper leaflets because people throw those away, but once your doctor has written on them, they become like precious relics and collaborative tools. So we're experimenting with that. We have a series of audio stories, actually fiction stories from South Africa's favorite storyteller. And she created those for us in English, isiZulu, and isiXhosa, so 3 of the 5 languages that are most spoken. And she's fictionalized the 4 main tips and how to manage your diabetes into 5 stories. So we're experimenting with those as WhatsAppable audio notes. And we're trying to see what it is that really connects with people so we can double down on that. It's like our grand experiment with Sweet Life. And then when we speak externally, we're talking to the media and we're talking to healthcare providers, and they are, as most of us are, completely overburdened, right? Way too busy, no time to absorb anything new, running around frazzled the whole time. And so what the challenge is there is that diabetes isn't their top priority. It's clearly our top priority because we're living with it, but it's not their top priority. And so again, you can't just hand people a stack of facts and be like, yeah, care about this thing, because they just won't.
Yeah.
So this week we launched Language Matters, which is a global campaign. We launched it in South Africa, and it's specifically about the language and imagery used around diabetes and how important it is to use empowering language that doesn't create stigma and images that accurately represent what people living with diabetes are like. So I had the media launch on Thursday, and I was thinking about what to say to the media because we had a bunch of journalists there, some of them health focused, many of them not, none of them particularly interested in diabetes. And I thought, well, I really care about this stuff. Like, I deeply care about this stuff. And instead of just saying, you should care about this, I care about this, you should care about this, I wound back to why I care about this.
Wonderful.
And it related to when I was diagnosed and that terrible information I was given, and then all the pictures I saw afterwards of these like sad, unhealthy people, and I didn't want to be one of them. And the language I was given was that I would now suffer from a disease for the rest of my life and be a patient. And like, I just flat out rejected all of that. And I was able to convey to these journalists why this stuff matters in a very personal way. Yeah. And I could see them coming along on the journey with me. And so that to me is the power of story, right? Yeah. Because we all have so many things that set us apart and make us different, but then we all have so many things that connect us, no matter what country we're in, no matter what conditions we're living with, no matter our age or race or background or socioeconomic conditions. And if we can find those threads and connect those through story, I think that's really powerful.
But I think that's so beautiful. Just to highlight some of what you said, the idea that language, images, but there's this grand connector and a sense of trust that's fostered through story, a sense of trust, a sense of knowing, a sense of being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. There's a great quote by Antonia Portia, who was a poet, South American poet, who said, "I know what I have given you, I don't know what you've received." And stories are able to build that bridge because they're multi-layered. They have emotion, they have facts. They create a sense of context. They give you images that you'll remember. So that's really so powerful, and congratulations about that media launch. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Willeke, can you tell us a little bit about what story means to you and how you're finding you're using it in your work?
Yeah, and I thought it builds a lot on what Bridget actually was mentioning. So within the Resource Alliance, we work with a lot of fundraisers for non-profit organizations to create impact across the world. And it's really important, if you're talking about fundraisers, finding financial resources to support the causes that they're operating for is how can you get somebody along, and how can you really create that attention towards cause. And research really has shown that people donate to a cause. And the main important reason there is that they have been asked. If they haven't been asked for anyone, for any kind of cause to support, they would not donate. So the first answer that they would give is, why did you donate? Actually, somebody asked me to donate. And that's already, I think, a whole part around storytelling. Are we telling the story, and are we reaching people that we really want to reach with the causes that we are working upon? But then the question is around, how do you reach people, and how, what is the link there with creating that trigger to donate? And we see there a lot of urgency. Urgency is always a kind of a trigger. Whenever there's a big disaster in the world, think recently around, for example, the disaster and the earthquake in Turkey. There's such a media attention around it already, but it's quite easy to build upon and to ask people to give a donation and to support the causes related towards the earthquake. But when there is a silent disaster, or when it's a cause that does not get so much attention, you really have to create that awareness.
That's absolutely,
Yeah. I just wanted to add there, maybe, Jessica, because in the past, what I really see changing there over time is we still know that seeing is believing. When somebody is there, and that's pretty what you were mentioning as well, when the cause is next door to you and everyone can see it, people understand and people relate to it. But when you don't see it, how do you bring that story towards people? And I feel that what we see in changes are two elements in it. In the past, we really would kind of bring the story to the people, describe, this is a woman living in Africa, this is in a village, and, there is a big inequality gap there. And by providing certain income opportunities, this will change the life of the woman. But it was very much, a kind of an us versus them story. And what we see happening at the moment is that story is changing towards a broader inequality perspective, where you really can reflect upon yourself as well. Am I part of this inequality gap? And am I therefore part and connected towards the woman that we were talking about maybe in the 70s, 80s in Africa? We are a bit in the same bracket. And I think another important thing that we see there is about who is telling the story and whose story is it. And that's absolutely crucial. Can we still allow ourselves today to talk about a woman in a village in an African country? Or should we really ask the woman in a village in an African country to tell her story towards a broader audience? And I think those changes are really interesting and quite exciting in a way.
Well, look, I think you're bringing up really good points, because there's a way to be an amplifier of other people's stories versus taking the paintbrush from their hands and painting for them rather than empowering them to paint for themselves. The idea of lived experience, there's a lot of kind of things going around the storytelling community right now. But just to quickly add before we go on to Catherine, you're in a position where you're creating space for other people to tell their story. How hard is it then to tell your own story? Resource Alliance's story is, can you start sympathizing when you're actually trying to build the story of your own organization, sometimes how difficult it is to identify what it is and how to do it?
Yeah, I think if you operate across different cultures and a different, if you're a global organization, you really want to represent the voices of the globe. And I think a really interesting part is there, not necessarily to start with telling, but actually to start with listening. So the listening part, or what are the stories within the community and how can we create a unified way there, or sometimes not a unified way, but celebrate the diversity, I think is really crucial.
Yeah.
And the cognitive diversity within the organization is important, is very exciting, you know, coming in from different starting points.
Yeah.
But at the same time, sometimes also, how do you reflect that in the best way in telling your own story?
Yeah.
And getting that alignment is it's important to get an alignment and to tell one story, but also, again, being aware whose story is it. And have we done our homework, as I would call it, to really reflect the different voices within our community? Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. So being a story nerd, there's lots of books out there about how to tell a good story. Lots of like first act, second act, third act. There's Joseph Campbell, there's Robert McKee, there's screenwriting, there's oral storytelling. There's all these theories about what makes a good story, the physics of a good story that anyone can learn. But why do stories work? We have to call on someone like Catherine. So I'm very glad you're here, Catherine. Can you talk a little bit about, within your work, within your research and what you've seen, why do stories work?
It's a really interesting thing, Jessica. You used the phrase to walk in someone else's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I also try to do in my work is to allow people to walk in their own shoes, to make them feel safe enough to do that. And the reason it works is that there's an element of a safety net in a story. So in the 1980s, for example, there were a number of studies that were done about the use of expressive writing in therapy. And that works for obvious reasons. Expressive writing is usually diary writing. And we can all, I expect, identify with the element of catharsis that comes from that. But fiction and storytelling is a slightly different thing. And what actually happens is that when people are encouraged to tap into what they know about their experiences and transfer that into a fictional character and a fictional story, there's a real alchemy that happens there. And the reason I work with a psychologist is that the psychologist supports them through that process should there be traumatic things that come up within that process. And often what happens is that the psychologist also helps people to feel safe enough to access that deeper level. So I say to people who are doing the course, don't come in on that level, go to that level, the one where the experience is really painful, really traumatic, in which you've locked away. That's when this will work. Now, why can they write about it in a way that they can't speak about it? Well, because in order to write about it, I have to say, what did I feel? What did I experience? What was that emotion like? And in the analysis of that emotion, I then hand it over to this fictional character who experiences it for me. Now, when you add the element of fiction in there, the character is slightly different. For example, when I wrote my novel that was about bereavement, my character was a heavy drinker and teetotal. In that tiny, silly, incidental detail, there was a removal from me. This was somebody else. And I get to plan out all sorts of things, actions, behaviours, thoughts, feelings, through this other character. But here's the other difference from diary writing. A diary is usually a one-off thing, we write it down. When we're writing a story, a fictional story, we tend to work with a plot, with a structure, we come back to it, we redraft it, we work with this character. And what Patrick and I found within the course was that people who went through that process, by the end of the process, they had become familiar with this issue. They were no longer scared of it. They had handed it over to this person, they had worked it out. Now, a number of the things that people said that were really interesting at the end of the process, one, which was music to my ears, said, I'm really bored with my issue now, I want to write about something else. So they had come to a stage where this thing that they didn't dare speak about, barely dared mention, was actually something that they'd gone, all right, okay, let's move on now. And they had processed something. Somebody else who was dealing, that person actually was dealing with rape. Somebody else who was dealing with body image actually said at the end, they wrote a piece, one of the tasks was, they write about the worst possible scenario for their fictional character. And she wrote about an absolute humiliation. And then you had to write about the peak for this character. And she wrote about walking into a party in this amazing dress, feeling like $1 million. And she said at the end of it, in her analysis of the task, I suddenly realized that there is a switch in my mind. why could I not feel like my character did? Well, I could.
Oh,
I
wow.
suddenly realised that I could. And that was what the fictional process did for her. And I'm sure that you can see that, as well as this being a fantastic kind of tool for us as individuals, many of the people who went on the course say that when things get tough for them, they now start writing a story to make themselves feel better. But there's also a fantastic resource there for people in companies who want to support staff, particularly maybe staff in areas who are dealing with difficult things, in the areas perhaps of health and social care. That kind of process of fictional writing is something that produces really strong results for participants, creates a safety net, and allows people to process things in a way that is safe and secure and private until they want to make it something else.
Yeah. Can I ask, because Willeke brought up this idea of being a good listener and how critically important that is. Bridget was talking about how meaningful it was when she's thinking about her audience to actually have to rewind and go back to that first moment of being diagnosed and then taking them along the journey with her. For the people that you work with, how important is it to know that they're going to have someone also experiencing that character and that they can actually hand it off to someone else? Is that part of the process?
It's absolutely critical. And actually, one of the interesting things about it is that, before COVID, I wouldn't have dreamt of trying to teach creative writing online, and then discovered that it was perfectly possible to create that circle of trust. And I always make really clear to people, this is a safe space. You're not back at school. Nobody's going to ask you to read out what you've written. Go to the depths because you're safe. But what you find is that within a couple of weeks, people want to share. And actually, the element of fiction, nobody knows, I always say, nobody knows what element of your story is fiction and what's fact. So there's a security there too. And then people begin to share. And what I find is that they get as much support from the rest of the group as they do from Patrick the psychologist and from me as the tutor. They support one another to the extent that some have continued to meet as a group.
That's amazing.
To kind of, discuss their writing. So that element of trust is really super important.
It does. Stories create community. And one of my favorite quotes by Joseph Campbell is, "What we do in life, we do through play." And I love the idea that thinking of stories for people who are looking to use it in your business or in your personal life, stories are a process. They're a feedback system of looking at your audience and thinking about what's going on with you. So can I ask for our panelists, I'm going to throw it out there and you guys just jump in. I'm looking at you on a screen. I don't know what you see of this, but I am looking at you. Can you offer either a learning experience you've had about a story or a bit of advice that you found as you're crafting stories, you're thinking about story for your business? Do you have any little bits of advice that you can offer our audience? People come from all walks of career life here, from forestry to the creative industries to data science. So any little bits of advice?
Well, maybe I will start, if that's okay, Jessica.
Yeah.
I think a bit of advice is one of the things that always surprises me when we're talking about storytelling, and definitely in the area that I'm working within in the social impact sector. It's really surprising me how connected we are across the globe. We always think there are different cultures, and you don't understand me because we are completely different, etc. But I think that linking and learning and sharing with each other is so crucial. Because it often gives a basis or a starting point that you can adapt towards your own culture or adapt towards your own organization or your own situation. But there is a lot of learning out there and a lot of storytelling out there and ways in which storytelling really works that you can kind of build upon. I sometimes really notice that, and we say that within our community as well, like, the wheel has been invented already. It doesn't have to be reinvented anymore. It's there, but it's almost like what kind of a wheel really fits your organization or fits within your audience that you want to create a message and share a message with.
Yeah.
And it really surprises me. We organize a lot of virtual events where people from across the globe come together, and once a year a big international fundraising congress where over 1,000 people come together from over 80 countries.
Yeah.
The magic there, what is happening is that suddenly we are all kind of one, you know, we all are this big community sharing, learning, telling our stories and building upon it. It's not like you're really crazy with your story there, you know, it's almost the other way around. Like, tell us more. We want to hear your story and how can we use it? Even while before really hearing that and listening towards it, there might have been a thought, you know, what is happening in India is not relevant in South Africa or might not be relevant in Argentina. And the big surprise is it actually really is.
Yeah.
And what I found beautiful there as well is that it's definitely no longer north-south divides. It's really west to east and east to north, and it's crisscrossing everywhere. You know, we really can build on it. And I'm not saying every story is the same for everyone, absolutely not. But I am saying that we definitely notice if we can build on each other's stories. And I think, Catherine, you were addressing that as well. You know, the stories that are shared, that are told, might be really meaningful for others, even while they want to adapt it a little bit to their personal situations and build upon.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I found the same thing as you're saying, but I'm part of the WHO as a global diabetes compact forum. So it's people from all over the world joining together. And it's so striking. Every time we meet together, that so many of the issues, particularly from a lived experience, so many of the issues are the same. And our backgrounds are vastly different. Like our day-to-day experience could not be more different. And yet there are certain things that we share. I'm going to jump in now got the stage, Jess. I would say my best advice would be to keep it simple and practice a lot. I think it's hard sometimes when we are trying to like refine what our story is, to know which details to include and which ones to leave out. And the best way to do that is to tell the story a lot to as many different people as possible and ask for feedback, because I've seen it happen a lot in media, and again, particularly with people telling their lived experience stories, where they'll start to, and it's a great story. Like, I've heard the story before, the punchline's superb, like it really hits you in the gut. It's going to make people change their mind about how they feel about a certain issue. But they meander off and start giving all these details about like some random offshoot part of the story that really doesn't matter. And so you want to keep it as simple as possible and almost plot it out, as Catherine was saying earlier. Like, we don't often think of that when we're telling autobiographical stories, but we have beginning, middles, and ends, and we have like tension building and then being released, and we have a moment where everything changes and then the thing changes. And if you include all the other random details along the way, sometimes that story arc can get lost. So keep it simple and practice a lot.
It's good advice.
I think actually there's an interesting thing. My course is actually called From Fact to Fiction. So I think my advice would be to believe in yourself as a storyteller. We all have experiences and emotions that we have in common with other people, but we each have a unique approach. And actually, when teaching in schools, sometimes I used to say, you know, when I travelled to London, I would sit on the tube often and think, isn't it remarkable how many thousands and thousands of people you pass, and we all have distinctive facial characteristics. We can tell one from another. And it's the same in our approach to life. So take confidence in your own voice, your own experiences, and use them. We sometimes think that writing is all about imagination. Writing is about the intersection between experience and imagination. It's in that magic circle that you will create a story. And the other thing I think to remember is that there is a joy and a purpose and a point to writing stories, even when they're not of a publishable standard. So I've written and published 4 novels, and there's a really weird thing that happens. You're writing this story, it's very private, it's quite a lonely occupation in lots of ways, and suddenly when it comes to publication, it's public, and you feel, oh, wait a minute, this is quite exposing. But even if that moment doesn't come, even if the writing and the process is for you alone, there is a joy and a purpose to that. And so If your spelling's a bit wonky and your structure's not that great, well, those things can be corrected and helped if you want to improve on it for that purpose. But if you just want to take the pleasure of storytelling, then just tell the story in your own way. Let it all come out, transfer those feelings, ask yourself, what was that experience about? Stop trying to pluck out of the air a story. Use things that you know about and that you have experienced and work that into your fiction.
That's very good advice. And I would say we've actually seen some really good storytelling today that we can learn from. So Strategy Story used metaphor, which was a beautiful metaphor of the squirrels, for those who've seen it, the gray squirrels and the red squirrels. And metaphor, people would say, is like a bullet train taking you from one destination to another. And I'll give you an example of metaphor. Metaphor would be, let's pretend this is my first day on the job. And it's intense. I'm a gopher that has just poked their head up in the middle of a 2-lane highway where I thought I was going to be in a field. And I see the cars rush by and my heart's racing, but I get out of the hole and I start running with the cars and I grab on one of them and I start going with the flow. And suddenly you're there. You hear a story. It has nothing to do about my job. It has all to do with emotion. So they say metaphor is actually the kind of most powerful, impactful way to offer some kind of emotion or contextualize your business. When I'm working with scientists, the number one thing that scientists unfortunately need to do when communicating their work is add emotion back into it. So it's something they're supposed to take out of the scientific process when they're doing their research, but when they start communicating their work and why it's important, they have to put emotion back into it. So they're kind of little tricks of the trade. And in order, before I open up to the floor, in order to kind of show an example of the impactful nature of stories, I'm going to put my guests on the spot. Can you tell us, and I can go first if you guys need more time, but can you tell us a little bit about a story about when you learned an important lesson? It can be recently. It can be far away. I will start telling a quick story so I can have people think. When I was working at NASA, we hired a storyteller named Jay O'Callahan. He's an oral storyteller, and the whole purpose was he was supposed to come, live within NASA, kind of imbibe the atmosphere, talk to people, be a good listener, collect stories, and create a story that speaks to the heart of a government organization, which has never happened before. And we invite Jay, who's an incredible artist, down to Washington, D.C., and he gets in a boardroom with a bunch of suits, no windows, heads of NASA and the government, and we sit down and we're like, here's Jay. And they look like, what did this lady just do? He had a staff, and he was wearing a lovely cape, and he was so kind of charismatic, but they're like, well, what is this? And they asked Jay, they're like, okay, this is great, but what are we paying for? What's your deliverable? And I was getting really nervous, and I could see they were getting kind of irritated, and Jay was such a professional. He stood up and put his hands on the table and said, let me tell you a story. And he tells them a story and the entire room transforms, and then people started talking to each other. So the lesson I learned, which kind of did a little bit of a meta thing, is how important it is, when in doubt, just tell a story. When in doubt, tell a story. It can literally be any story, but it starts building empathy and carries bits of information, and also allows people to trust the speaker. They feel like they're getting to know them a bit. They know them a little bit deeper. So, when in doubt, tell a story.
I'll do one, but it doesn't involve NASA or a meta storytelling, so it's going to be super lame in comparison. A couple of years ago, I want to say almost 4 years ago now, I decided that it is outrageous that 1 in 2 people with diabetes is undiagnosed in South Africa. So I managed to get a meeting at the National Department of Health with the 2 heads of the non-communicable diseases department. And I marched in and I was like, this is outrageous. You guys need to allow everyone to come in for annual testing the way you do for HIV. Like, this is a no-brainer. Why aren't you doing this? And they listened to me rant very kindly, and then at the end they said to me, we completely understand where you're coming from. We can't speak to one nonprofit organization. We need you to go and form an organization that includes an alliance, that includes all the organizations and companies and associations working with diabetes in South Africa. And then they said goodbye, and I could see that they had like mentally crossed me off a list because they were like, oh, we're not going to hear from her again. But when Sweet Life first started, we were a magazine, and we were a quarterly magazine for 5 years. And we would send the magazine out 4 times a year for free to people with diabetes. It was delightful. That's how you communicated with people in 2011. And because of that, I had contacts at all the companies, organizations, and associations in South Africa working with diabetes. And I had been so sad when we had to close the magazine because the advertising laws changed. And I felt like it had been a waste in some way because now we were moving entirely digital, and what had all of that been for? But it turned out that now when I needed all those contacts, they were all still there. They still recognized me. They trusted me. I'd been in the industry for a long time. And so we were able to form the Diabetes Alliance and go back to the National Department of Health as an alliance of all the associations, companies, and organizations working with diabetes in South Africa, which was deeply satisfying for me. But the lesson I learned is that sometimes when something ends, you don't know why it's ended.
Yeah.
And it can feel very disheartening. But if you are patient, often things will reveal themselves later on and reveal why they had to happen the way they did.
Bridget, that's beautiful and
No
thoughtful
NASA.
advice. It's better. That's really good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Willeke, Catherine?
Yeah. Well, I think the story that springs to mind for me is actually thinking about people who have taken part in the course, and I'm thinking of one woman in particular. I was looking for volunteers for the study, the formal study that we were doing, and this particular woman said to me, yeah, listen, I'll be involved. I really don't feel that I have anything to work out anymore. I feel that my trauma, which happened maybe 20 years ago, is now processed. I'm okay with it, but I'm very interested in the study and I'm interested in the process, so I'll volunteer. So she was one of the formal study. And the interesting thing for me was that at the end of the course, there are a number of tasks that people are given in between the lessons as a kind of homework if they're, to kind of process the issue that they're working on. And I found that different people found different tasks the one that challenged them most. And for this particular woman, it was task 4, which for most people was not the big issue at all. This was the one where she owned what her issue was and spoke about it. And she told me that she had absolutely dissolved in tears, had been completely taken aback by how much anger she felt inside, that she thought she didn't have any, but it all flooded out in this particular task. And what was interesting for me was that when I thought about other people in the course, it was very often the people who seemed really together and really happy to kind of contribute and come in were very strong, who at some point or other dissolved. And it really taught me that, as we all know, appearances are not everything. Never believe that the person who doesn't look nervous is not nervous, that the person who looks like they've got everything together has got it together, because we all have that weakness and that vulnerability. And it really came across within the course.
Wow, that's a really powerful lesson. Thank you, Catherine. That's amazing. Willeke.
Yes, I was thinking about a nice, story and situation I was in earlier this year in India. I was asked to participate in a jury where they were judging after a course in India, a couple of people around giving a presentation for potential funder. And then really talk about their cause and why the funder should really fund them, and maybe to give a little bit of why it was so important for me. Often what happens there, if you're a fundraiser, you're kind of in the midst between often two worlds. One is the programs and the projects that you really want to support and the people there involved in the projects, and on the other hand, the funder who is giving the donations to make the purpose and the cause happening and the programs happening. And being a fundraiser, you are connected with those two worlds. But what often happens is that a fundraiser is really, talking towards the funder by saying, we know what's important for you, therefore this is the story, this is the case for support that we want to address. This is the story you want to hear, and that's how we get the funding in. And it's a big debate at the moment within the social impact sector about whose story are we really telling, and also about, are we really talking towards the funder to make fundraising happening, or are we really saying, no, we have a better role to play there. We should really tell the story that is happening on the ground and from the programs and the projects, and that's a stronger story. And this was a woman of, I think, 23, 25 years old, and I'm hitting 50 this year, so she was quite young. She really knew who her audience was. There were 3 men and me in the jury. The other 3 people were from big foundations who could really fund her organization. The topic that she was talking about and the cause that her organization is working about is creating awareness and solutions about women and their periods. Mm-hmm. They are doing a lot of advocacy work and providing products in schools, in work situations, etc. And she absolutely nailed it. Wow. She did her kind of theory book about this is how you do the perfect presentation towards a funder. She showed the impact, but also she really brought in her personal story around it. Wow. She was mentioning that a week ago, this is where I was and this is what is happening, and people created kind of trust when you talk about that authentic way of what is happening there. But then also saying, here are things that probably you as a funder do not want to hear, but they are important to tell. There you go, 25-year-old, tell us what is important to know. And she individually really asked us for our support dedicated to the roles that we have in our working life. And I thought it was just mind-blowing. So one of the things I think that I definitely learned from there is, yes, the how-to in stories. I think what is important, that is definitely an aspect that we all can build upon. How do you tell the story, and what are the arches and what are the elements that are important around it? But I think her personality and daring to bring that personal aspect in, and knowing what is really the purpose here. Yeah. It's not only you as a funder and the fundraising. I've got a bigger purpose to serve. It was beautiful and mind-blowing. So yeah, she did win. Yeah, of course.
I think that's a huge, powerful lesson, that it's beyond the task at hand, that you really do need to connect to that deep sense of purpose. And you used a word, that I really liked, that she essentially was bold enough to put her own personal story in there, which, that's hugely powerful. What I find really striking is that you 3 are in very different industries. And usually storytelling was seen as something that was just belonging to the creative industries, and yet we can see from this panel that storytelling, I'm sensing, is essential for all your work. Could you do what you do without story? Yeah.
No.
That's what I find. That's what I find so interesting. It shows you actually how important that story is everything. Now, I want to open it up to our room and also our panelists. If our panelists have questions for each other, please do jump in. But we're also going to, I think there's a mic roving around somewhere that Alex has in case anyone has any questions for our panelists. Tim.
Thanks. That's been absolutely fascinating, and it's tremendous the way you've talked in large part around stories' power to bring us together and act as a collective and expose ourselves to one another in a meaningful way. I wonder if you've ever thought about I'm sure you've thought about it, but do you want to reflect on how story in the context of identity can also be a very defining thing, so that a shared story can define a collective quite closely, to the extent that in some cultures the notion of secret stories that are only shared between limited groups can be tremendously powerful things as well.
Yeah, or be constrictive, I guess, in some ways. Does anybody want to jump in?
Maybe let me share a story that happened earlier this week when I was participating in a panel around a topic that's called shift the power, and that's really shifting the power from the north to the south, shifting the power from the funder to the programmatic work. And it's an interesting discussion and debate. And I think we are not there yet. But yeah, a lot of things have happened. And it was a group of funders that came up with principles about how to operate in a better way and really respect that shift of power. And one of the principles was mentioning around we always should operate in a truthful manner, in which somebody in the audience said, that's really nice, but that is even a view where you are reflecting upon societies that do not operate in a truthful manner. And there are also societies that do not even understand the concept truth because they never had to think about it. And it was mind-blowing for me. I thought, wow, this is so beautiful to hear, and sometimes you always reflect from that what you know and are open to hear what is out there, but it's not meaning that there is a common demeanor around it. So that brings me definitely back to that listening perspective and being open for those different insights, which I think is a beautiful aspect, and how amazing, that there are societies that do not have to think about truth because it's not an issue.
Wow. That's incredible, Wilke. Thank you. And you bring up a really interesting question, especially because social media is full of stories. We're talking a lot about oral storytelling, but it's also the way you present yourself online. It's a creative writing workshop. It's presenting to the media. It's running a presentation and a workshop. But it's also TikTok. It's YouTubers. And so that idea that there's secret stories or stories that are told to define particular smaller communities, I think is becoming rarer and rarer. Because the global audience or the global reach, you actually can expand what would have been a smaller community into kind of a larger global community through shared interests, through shared experiences. Things like that.
I think there's something interesting about the unifying aspect of stories in terms of businesses, because I mentioned earlier about the ability to support staff through storytelling, for example, in a health setting, a social care setting, where people come together to tell stories in which there's a kind of element of catharsis, in sharing and describing what's going on, and that's very helpful. But the beauty of stories is that they can go in so many different individual directions. And for example, I write a newspaper column, and this week I was writing about addiction because it's Mental Health Week. And I was saying that, somebody, when I ran an interview with a pop star who was addicted, and an old friend got in touch and said, I've noticed that you seem to empathise a lot with addicts. And I knew that underneath this was a little subtle question. So, Catherine, tell me your story. Have you been an addict? Now, I hadn't, but my reply to him was, it didn't really matter whether I had or I hadn't. The empathy comes from understanding that addiction is actually about trauma. It's about pain, that when you unravel addiction, that's at the heart of it. That I could identify with. That's what we can all identify with. And actually that's the beauty of storytelling, that even if your story is not exactly the same as the story that you're listening to, there will be an emotional element of it that you will be able to relate to in some way.
Yeah. I would also say to you, Bridget, this might be a question for you because you've written through your kind of grief handbook about your own personal experience too, that I think if you're authentic in your storytelling, you're allowed to grow past the story you've told about yourself. Because it can be, if we're looking at storytelling and identity, it can be really restrictive. We've seen some speakers today say actually being from the Highlands and Islands becomes very much part of their identity and their story. But stories can become so restrictive and so simple that they end up kind of crushing you when your identity's gone beyond what you've experienced in the past. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with someone who shares their own story but is able to still kind of grow and move past it?
Yeah, I find this fascinating because I see it a lot. I saw it when I was writing my book, but I also see it a lot in our community. We run a lot of stories. We actually call the section stories because people want to share how they were diagnosed, how diabetes affects them, what they wish they'd known when they were diagnosed, best advice they can offer, that kind of thing, what they've been able to do with diabetes. And I remember when I first started studying creative writing, one of my professors said to me, I wanted to set my story in this like nebulous, neither here nor there world, because I didn't want to be defined by setting or place. And he said to me that the more specific you can make somewhere, the more you invite people in. Because if you can describe something really specifically and authentically in terms of what it felt like and what it sounded like and what it smelled like and how it made you feel, then other people can join you in that. And I found that so interesting in the grief handbook. So my mom died very suddenly. She was diagnosed and died 10 days later. Turned out she had 4 different kinds of cancer. All these other terrible things happened at the same time. All the grandkids, so my kids and my nephews and nieces all got rotavirus. One ended up in hospital. Her dog committed suicide. A wrecking ball came into the neighboring house and started smashing it down. It was like, if I'd been watching a movie, I would have been like, okay, the metaphors are a little heavy-handed here. We get what you're trying to say. But when I was writing about it, that's a very specific kind of experience. I had a very good relationship with my mom. I have 3 older brothers. We're all very close. What's been so interesting to me is that I've had so many messages from people afterwards to say that although their circumstances were very different, the undercurrent remains the same, right? So they had lost a husband, or they had lost a child, or they had lost a parent with a fraught relationship. But so much, if you can be really specific and authentic, so much of the story resonates, because
Beautiful.
I mean, we're all saying the same thing, right? It's the humanity in us that connects, and those elements that form our identity that connect. And we found that a lot with Sweet Life, is that people will be telling a story and they were diagnosed in completely different circumstances to me and with a completely different family background, but the experience of being diagnosed with a chronic condition is universal.
Yeah.
If you are diagnosed with a chronic condition, and so there's like a heart connection that you can often feel, I think.
That's wonderful. Any other questions? We are growing to the end of our conference and our time. I have to say, this is a total high note to end our conference on. Thank you all very much, with different time zones and different places, for joining us. Just a round of hand to our panelists. Thank you all, and I hope you tell a good story. Careful the tale you tell, that's the spell. Says, thank you guys very much. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks so much. Just a quick one from us. We have to kind of clear the room pretty fast if we can, but just I wanted to say we really appreciate you joining us and spending your Saturday with us, and really hope you found something useful here. And we're going to be hanging around. There's a few of us about, so we'd love to speak to you more. Exmouth, please go on our site. We've got lots of specialist support programs, workshop programs, lots of great stuff there. We'd love to stay in touch with you and see how we can help what you're doing. Huge thanks to Highland Cinema for being such great hosts. Dougal and the team at Inner Ear for all the tech support. We really appreciate that. It's been a great day, and thanks so much once again. Thank you.